you must include every debt you have, even non-dischargeable debts, in your petition when you file that document with the court. You can't leave debts out. Now, some of them that you've included may be debts that are not dischargeable, say student loans or certain tax debts. You still have to list them. Now, you can discharge condo association fees, HOA dues, as long as they are what are called pre-petition dues. What do I mean by that? The day you file the bankruptcy petition is called the petition day, and that petition date is a key measuring stick. Anything prior to that is pre-petition. Anything after that is post-petition. So pre-petition HOA dues are dischargeable in a bankruptcy. Post-petition HOA dues and condo fees are not dischargeable in a bankruptcy. So if you're doing a Chapter 7, any HOA dues that you incur after the day that you file the bankruptcy papers, you're on the hook for. Any HOA dues that you incurred prior to filing will be discharged. And similarly in the other chapters, Chapter 13, it means you don't necessarily have to pay them in full. Now, why is this a significant thing? Well, for a while there, in the last housing crisis, and I suspect this is going to rear its ugly head in the not too distant future, back in 2008, 9, 10, when the whole housing debacle hit, there were people who were suddenly underwater by large amounts of money who couldn't make the mortgage payments because, let's say, they had been in negatively amortized loans and they wanted to just walk away from the house in bankruptcy. Well, normally that sounds like a pretty good idea. If you can't make the payments and you're underwater, walk away from it. It can be a good move. Now, if you walk away from the house, you say, I am returning the house to the mortgage company, to the lender. Is the lender required to take possession of the house? Can you force somebody to accept the house back? And that creates a very interesting tension here. Turns out you can't force them to take the house back. So what was happening with some regularity for a while is a person would surrender the house to the mortgage company, then the mortgage liability is discharged in the bankruptcy. The pre-petition condo fees or HOA dues, that's discharged in the bankruptcy, but post-petition HOA dues continue to accrue. Who's on the hook for them? The mortgage company? They didn't take possession of the house. So the debtor is still on the hook for those post-petition HOA dues or condo dues, whatever they are, until such time as title transfers from the debtor to somebody else. And this could go on for a couple of years. So in that scenario, what I told people is live in the house. Don't pay the mortgage because your personal liability is going to be discharged in the bankruptcy, but make sure you keep paying your HOA dues. Think of that as a reduced rent. And then finally, when the foreclosure sale happens, well, you can be squirreling away money that you would have been using to pay the mortgage payments and use that to move to another place. But that post-petition HOA due liability did have a sharp edge to it. And I suspect that's going to happen again, because when that debacle happened 10 years or so ago, what was going on? Well, people had been buying houses like crazy. And the view was, from the mortgage companies, the bank's perspective, this was a surefire bet. People were buying houses, they were taking out mortgages, and so banks were willing to relax the standards. And so you didn't necessarily have to have 20% down, maybe you only needed 10% down or 5% down or 0% down. They were near the end of the big surge up. There were people that were buying houses and they had negative 25% down. In other words, they were borrowing 125% of the value of the house. But the rationale was, since the demand was so high, prices were going to just keep going up and up and up. And very shortly thereafter, the person was going to have a lot of equity. And so this would not be a problem. Now, if you're borrowing 125% of the value of the house, that means your mortgage payments are going to be quite high. And so the banks were accommodating there as well, and they let people have negatively amortized mortgages. What do I mean by that? Well, normally if you have a mortgage, and if I can use some hand gestures here, your monthly payments have two components. There's a payment of interest and a payment of principal. Now, when you first start, it's practically all interest because the interest is being calculated on the current balance, and the balance is huge when you first take out the mortgage. But as time goes on, the interest comes down and more of the payment is attributable to principal. But suppose you're in one of these scenarios where you've purchased the house and borrowed 125% of the value of the house, and you can't afford that fully amortized payment. So maybe you'll do just interest only. You're flatlining, and in essence, you're a renter without the mobility because you can't move unless somebody buys the house from you. Or negative amortization, you're paying less than full interest. Well, what happens to the interest you didn't pay? That gets added to the principal balance, and the principal balance keeps growing. Well, the banks had a trigger point. And once you hit that trigger point of 115%, what that meant is the balance went up to 115% of the original loan balance. That ended the negative amortization. And at that point, you went from paying reduced negative amortization to paying the entire fully amortized payment plus a premium to catch up. And that is one of the factors that triggered the waves of foreclosure. Well, what's been happening now under these various statutes is we've got this mortgage forbearance. And so people have not been making their mortgage payments. And this is going on for a while. I will say that the CARES Act did have a provision that said that the banks, the mortgage companies, couldn't tack on additional interest. But somewhere along the line where people have not been paying their mortgages, the bill is going to come due, because if you've got, let's say, 20 years still on the mortgage and you don't have a job and this persists for a while, eventually you're going to face a foreclosure sale. And when these waves of foreclosure start to hit, I suspect we're going to see the problem with the HOA dues and the condo dues coming up again, where the housing prices will collapse because the law of supply and demand applies to real estate every bit as much as anything else. When you have a wave of foreclosure, suddenly you have large supply without necessarily a concomitant large demand. And so prices will go down. People may be underwater, wanting to walk away from the house in a bankruptcy case. And next thing you know, you've got the issue with the HOA dues.